Alright guys, welcome back. We've got the Hughes and Kettner Redbox DI. This thing is a guitar cabinet simulator, but it does more than that. It allows you, if you have a separate head and cab, more specifically tube amp for sure, but even in your solid state amps it works, if you don't already have a DI or a line out system of any sort on your current amplifier. Okay, so here's the deal. You can actually go through your headphone jack on your amp, okay, and go right into your mixing board via a DI, okay? No big deal. And the wonderful thing about this Blackstar HT5 amp is it has its own simulated output when using the headphone jack for a 1x12 or 4x12 cabinet simulation, which you just push the button on the front panel to choose between them. Fantastic, works absolutely cool. But we don't get to hear our onboard speaker. Now on stage you want to hear your speaker, right? Am I right? Of course I am. So, but in the studio you may or may not want to hear your speaker. Okay, so there's where things get a little on the sneaky side. You cannot unplug your head from your cab, okay, and just leave nothing. Or you will fry your tube amp about that quick, okay? So you need a dummy loader of some sort or another way of suppressing it to give it an impedance match so that it thinks there's a speaker there when there really isn't. And of course you have to be on the appropriate ohmage of the output on the back of your amp. I have two 16 ohm outputs and I have an 8, and I'm currently using the 8, so there we go, right? And because I swapped out my speaker in my cab from a 16 to an 8, now I get my full 5 watts. But regardless of the fact, I have to have the speaker because I'm not spending $2,000 on a freaking toy just to not have to have my cab plugged in, right? And then the only way I'd hear things is through in-ear monitors. And it's kind of like, well, you know, I do like to cut things all in one track, which is great, but there's a limit to how loud you can have things, and it bleeds through your vocal mics and makes a disaster of everything, and then good luck trying to EQ that stuff out, and it's like, yeah. We need a simpler solution. And being that this is the only main amp that I now have, other than I do have an acoustic guitar amp, but it's for acoustic amps. I do have my Pathfinder 10 watt amp, which is for electrics, but it doesn't even have a line out system of any kind. So it's kind of like, well, you know, let's see what we can do with this. So anyways, this thing has some features that other DIs obviously don't have. And the biggest thing is it is an active box. And there's only 3 ways to power this. Phantom power on your board, which is what I'm using. Or if you have the optional to buy external power pack, you can get one that's 9 to 15 volt AC or 9 to 24 volt DC that has at least a minimum of 10 milliamps, because this thing chews about 2. 9 volt battery, of course, is the other option. You can just put 9 volt in. But then I thought, well, I asked the manager, I says, if I'm going to leave this hooked up all the time, that's going to kill my battery overnight, wouldn't it? Probably would. Of course, the manual doesn't say one way or another, which is, Hughes, you guys got to really get a little bit more clarifying in your frickin' manuals here. But anyways, this thing is for solid state and tube amps. So, but I thought, all right, well, 130 bucks, you know, can't I just use a regular everyday DI box? Apparently you can't. Not especially with a tube amp anyways. Not for this kind of a hookup, okay? So things are different with combos versus separate head, separate cab stuff. Just, it's the way it is. So alright, well we'll buy into this little toy, and you know, what's it got to really offer us anyways other than this? Well, it does have some interesting little features here. One, of course, we already know there's a ground and lift, okay? Big deal. Attenuator. Very common on all DI boxes. Now what we have that you don't normally find is a tight and loose. Now tight gives you a taut, dense tone that's great for throatier riffs. Loose conjures an airier, softer sound. Vintage and modern switch. Modern gives you voicings of the bark and honk of modern speakers, while vintage yields a warmer, woollier tone associated with old school cabs. So it actually gives your amp some extra voicings into the sound system, which is kind of nice when you're plugged in this way. Small and large. Small captures the compressed sound of a small housing. Large gives you a greater girth and added bass of a sizable cabinet. Okay, so that's, you know, it is a guitar cabinet simulator. Yes, it's going to alter the tone that you normally hear. So, you know, we normally hear, you know, this on clean. And then of course dirty. You know, it's kind of like, all right, well, that's okay. You know, like I like that sound, that's fine. But we're going to get an alteration of this tone now with this little box, you know. And so I found that the modern worked really good for me. Now, the box does nothing to your amplifier at all, as far as, you know, any of these features. Flick what you want, has no effect. Okay, where it affects it is when you're going through your XLR to your board, into your computer, or to your USB interface into your computer. That's where that box is going to alter the tones, okay, and give you the extra features that you don't even have built into your amp likely, right? Now, there are a lot of amps out there with modern and vintage switches, and yes, there is a tonal difference in what you hear, so it's kind of, I guess, what you're after and if it works for you. But, and besides, you can EQ anything afterwards. So, anyway, I know you guys want to hear what this thing actually does, and we want to play back that audio too. So we're going to move the camera over to the computer, and we're going to do some recording into the DAW with this thing. And I'll swap between, of course, clean and dirty. And of course we do have some, you know, a little bit of reverb there. So I like to have a bit of a wet signal, so sounds great. And then we'll see what it sounds like. And we'll play it back. What we record, we'll play back. So you're still going to hear this initially, and then when we play it back, you're going to hear what the differences are. So this ought to be interesting, okay? So bear with me, and we're going to have some fun. Okay, guys, so we got our DAW fired up. Everything's going. The first sounds, of course, you're going to hear is just the amplifier hitting my camera mic, because we're recording into the DAW. Now, of course, we are recording direct with the guitar, so whatever we do with the amplifier here has no influence on any tones. What we want to know is what it's actually going to sound like going through all this menagerie of stuff. So, anyways, of course, we're going to do clean and dirty stuff. We're going to flick switches. So I'm going to start with all the switches in the down position for the loose, the vintage, and the small. And we'll flip around with some clean stuff and dirty stuff and see what happens. We will play it back after we're done recording and see what kind of sound we get. And the sound you will hear the playback through is going to be my reference monitors hitting my microphone, so on my camera. So there you go. Alright, let's see what happens. Let's get rid of this and this though, because we don't need those. Okay, so we're going to go just to modern. Modern and tight. Modern, tight, and large. Vintage small, or sorry, vintage large and tight. And loose, large, and vintage. Small, tight, and vintage. And modern and just tight. And everything back to the bottom. And let's put on some distortion. Pocket metal buff. So we've got loose, vintage, and small. vintage small. Large, vintage, tight. Modern, tight, and large. And we'll go loose, moderate, large. Loose, modern, and small. And everything back to the bottom. All right, well, let's see what we captured. So I should be able to get that output going through there. And you should be able to just hit playback. Scratchy sounds you heard, that was me rolling around on the floor of my chair. Now we're about to come to the distorted stuff. That's it. Okay, so there are some very mild differences. Like they're noticeable, but they're not entirely noticeable. They're there. It's hints of this and that, which is kind of nice. I mean, you know, the average person would never figure that out. But, you know, it actually, there is some slight tonal shifts that you can hear if you really listen. The other thing I noticed is, okay, the guitar I was using was actually my new version, as they call it, Affinity Telecaster, Squire. And I noticed that I could hear in between track sections that we were recording, like these blank spots, I could actually just barely hear myself telling you guys what switch positions. Like barely audible, but I could just pick it up. And I'm like, okay, so my pickups are just slightly a little on the microphonic side. So it's kind of like, that's kind of interesting. That could explain why I cannot turn that amp up too loud with that guitar. Well, not obnoxiously anyways, and I would be getting some feedback very easily, which if they were potted pickups, or at least well potted pickups, they would not be able to pick my voice up like that. So they do have a slight bit of microphonic to them, but very minimal. So if they are potted at all, which I've not taken them apart to find out, then it's very minor amount that comes through if they are potted. So they're maybe dipped once instead of 3 times for, like, you know, a really massively good seal to not pick up your voice. But I'm okay with the pickups in my Tele anyways. So, and I have a 40th anniversary Telecaster that kicks butt too. But anyways, that's what we've got from the red box and how it's going to work going into your DAW. So as you heard when we were recording this, all you heard was my amplifier being recorded toward the camera, to the mic. And then when we played back everything, my camera is now by my reference monitor, and we recorded direct in all that stuff we did over there. We duplicated it by just recording it, right? So we know exactly this is what the amp's like in the room on its own. This is what it's like being recorded through to the DAW. You know, and hey, you know, be the judge for yourself. Could you hear the tonal shifts? I could hear some minor tonal shifts. So I'm glad that the red box doesn't actually wreck the sound of my amp on a recording. It actually keeps things really nice, actually. So I'm quite impressed with that. Even between the vintage and the modern, even though it's a very slight difference, it's audible and it's still appealing. So, where some amps I've actually had where it was a drastic difference between modern and vintage switch, especially on PV amps, right? You really hear it on those. And that can be good or bad depending on your taste. Anyways, hopefully that wraps everything up here for this one. I think the box deserves a 4.5 out of 5. I mean, it works absolutely the way it should. I'm glad that there's 3 different ways to power the box, because it does need the power system. And I like the extra features because you can do some slight tonal shifts that you may not necessarily be able to do otherwise, you know, and that could be, you know, good or bad for you. I don't know. I mean, I like what it does, so I ain't complaining. Yeah, definitely was a worthwhile investment, so that now I can run my tube amp into my system and do my recording, and things will turn out really great now. Now the only thing I got to work on is pushing more signal in, because I'm not really happy with the height of the waveforms. I would like to see these a little bit taller. This way it would give me more room that if I had to boost the guitar up more, I'd be able to do that. But you know, I can also fully EQ stuff and really, you know, jazz things up if I want to in here and just go full out, and I can do whatever I want, you know. And this is just playing around in GarageBand, right? I mean, I've also got Logic Pro, which gives me even more tools to work with, etc. Yeah, I think to me it's a winner, and definitely worth that 129 bucks Canadian. So do check one out, and if this is something where you have an amp that you would like to get going, you know, you'd be able to do this, and that would work for you. Works with solid state amps and of course tube amps. You can read the manual. Like, just if you go into a store that carries these things, whether it's Long McQuaid in Canada or somewhere else, just get the manager there or the sales guy to open up the box so you can read what it does say about everything in that thing and about what it can do and all that jazz. And it gets into a little bit of stuff here, but nothing that is going to be over your head for technical stuff, so you know, you'll be all right there. But I would say that if you've got a USB interface, make sure it has a phantom power capability. I believe mine actually does. Yeah, I actually do have phantom on mine. And of course my mixing board does either way, but I'm going in direct to the mixer, so I just use the phantom power from the mixer. Because of the signal, the studio control center I have, it's a weird hookup. But anyways, and do check out my video on the studio control center box. It's really super handy, and I'm really liking what it can do. And it's made by Art, so it's actually called Art SCC Project Series or Studio Control Center. You can flip any of those titles around and find it on my channel pretty simply. But in the meantime, thanks so much for watching. Hopefully it didn't take up too much of your time, but hopefully this helped, and we'll catch you on the next one. See ya.